Very pleased tonight to have Robert Pinsky with us. Teaches creative writing at Boston University, has won many awards, received many impressive fellowships, and as many of you may know, just within the last couple of weeks has been appointed the next Poet Laureate of the United States and consultant to the Library of Congress in poetry. His many books of poetry have been collected in a volume with some new poems as well called The Figured Wheel. We'll have copies for sale after the reading. He's also quite well known these days for his translations, and especially his translation of Dante's Inferno, which we will also have copies of for sale. And he's written criticism as well, and a variety of activities. I just would like to introduce him with a quote from an essay that he wrote called Some Notes on Reading. And this is the conclusion. Poetry for me is possibly a route to the real world, a way of respecting the actual, and all the more vital a route for twists, obliquities, compressions, and shadowy implications. Possibly it is, after all, the form that brings me closest to that old blessed belief in creation. Very pleased to be able to introduce to you Robert Pinsky.
Thanks very much. It's very nice to be here. Thank you for coming out. For those people, these are free here. There's a couple of chairs right here. We always admire the presence of people who are not shy to just take those chairs. There you go. We salute you. The microphone doesn't work. If I can keep it up here, will that be okay for the people back there? This is pretty good? Okay. I'll try not to forget and mumble later. I'll begin by picking up from David's kind introduction and the little quotation about respecting the actual. At some point in writing, I decided that everything was worth writing about. I truly believe that since each of us is different, at least in theory, there is a work of art that each of us could make that no one else could make. Just as our fingerprints and the smells of our bodies are slightly different, no one has had the experience of being born the year you were born, to those parents in that body. Similarly, I became convinced that whatever you lay your hands on, if you could understand it, you would understand human history. This is some kind of softwood. And this cove molding harks back to kind of 18th century American kind of cove molding. In the originals, it might have been softwood also, but the craftsmanship, the miter joint would have been very fine. Here, somebody, sort of a journeyman carpenter, put together a thing that it stained a color that's also associated with the early centuries of the United States. And somewhere in that guy's or woman's instructions or sense of propriety, there was this allusion to a colonial past. And the color of the thing, and the shape of the thing, the fact that it wound up in a library might have to do with that too. It's a civic building and a public building in this particular. So I'm bullshitting. but if I knew, I could tell you more. And the microphone comes from the Pocono District Center. Pocono is an Indian word. Or it's the way some group of white people heard an Indian word. Often these are all off. I'm told that Narragansett and Massachusetts are the ways two different white guys heard an Indian word, the same word. That's how blurred our reception of these things is. This is not the first poem. This is the talking before the first poem. I'm giving you a little picture of the conviction that the thing to write about is not necessarily your war experiences or your unbelievably cruel childhood or your ethnicity. it might be what you're thinking about all day but think is not poetic. If you think something is poetic, it's probably not the thing to write a poem about. Baudelaire made it poetic, or Wordsworth made it poetic, or it was already made poetic. So you think the city with fog in it is poetic because Baudelaire and Dickens made it poetic, and then filmmakers like Carol Reed and Orson Welles, who had read Baudelaire and Dickens, made it poetic. So it seems poetic to you. The genius now, who's 11 years old now, is going to make the shopping mall poetic, I guarantee you. Or whatever, the video game. Anyway, that's a little background on the project of trying to take the most ordinary thing possible, and largely through understanding its history, just consider the history of the language in which I'm addressing you. Immense vocabulary, English, because it itself is the product of invasion, expropriation, rape, and each group of people added more words. The conquered gave words to the conqueror. There's a hill in England called Torpenhow Hill. A tor in Scandinavian languages is a high place. Pen in Cornish is a high place. So the Scandinavian raiders beat up the Cornish people. They said, what's that called? Pen. So they called it Tor Pen, thinking that pen was a word. The Hof is also an elevation. So other conquerors said, what's that? It's Tor Pen. Torpenhow. And Torpenhow Hill. And if people come from Mars and conquer England, it would be Torpenhow Hill, Holland. Whatever. This poem is called Shirt. Shirt. The back, the yoke, the yardage, lapped seams, the nearly invisible stitches along the collar turned in a sweatshop by Koreans or Malaysians gossiping over tea and noodles on their break, or talking money or politics, while one fitted this arm piece with its overseam to the band of cuff eye button at my wrist. The presser, the cutter, the wringer, the mangle, the needle, the union, the treadle, the bobbin, the code, the infamous blaze at the Triangle Factory in 1911. 146 died in the flames on the 9th floor. No hydrants, no fire escapes. The witness in a building across the street who watched how a young man helped a girl to step up to the windowsill, then held her out away from the masonry wall and let her drop. And then another, as if he were helping them up to enter a streetcar and not eternity. A third, before he dropped her, put her arms around his neck and kissed him. Then he held her into space and dropped her. Almost at once, he stepped to the sill himself. His jacket flared and fluttered up from his shirt as he came down, air filling up the legs of his gray trousers, like Hart Crane's bedlamite, shrill shirt ballooning. Wonderful how the pattern matches perfectly across the placket and over the twin bar-tacked corners of both pockets, like a strict rhyme or a major chord. Prints, plaid, checks, houndstooth, tattersall, mattress. The clan tartans invented by mill owners, inspired by the hoax of Ashin, to control their savage Scottish workers, tamed by a fabricated heraldry. McGregor, Bailey, McMartin. The kilt devised for workers to wear among the dusty, clattering looms. Weavers, carders, spinners, the loader, the docker, the navvy, the planter, the picker, the sorter sweating at her machine in a litter of cotton as slaves in calico head rags sweated in fields. George Herbert, your descendant, is a black lady in South Carolina. Her name is Irma, and she inspected my shirt. Its color and fit and feel and its clean smell have satisfied both her and me. We've culled its cost and quality down to the buttons of simulated bone, the buttonholes, the sizing, the facing, the characters printed in black on neckband and tail, the shape, the label, the shape, the label, the labor, the color, the shade, the shirt. David and I both played the saxophone. The saxophone for me is another symbol, as I guess the shirt is in that poem, the kilt and the rest of it, culture. Is there, I don't mind making this quite informal. Does anybody want to ask a question? Or make a kind remark?
As a poet laureate, do you think that we'd be able to, in our discussion, as the president's discussion of standards, I think that when we talk about arts and humanities spending, do you think that we should focus on guaranteeing every child in this country an opportunity to write, the opportunity to work with media?
Arts education, in my opinion, is tremendously underestimated for its practical advantages. We were able to evolve the digital computer and the mathematics and the technologies that came before it because as a species we became very smart, and we became very smart because of our first technologies, which were the technology of verse, which is the grunts we make with our body. Same deal as the computer. Memory and speed. That's why we developed it. And things with pigments and things with moving our body. And to invest money in technologies, because they look hip and current. I'm a computer lover. I'm crazy about computers. I do a lot with them. I like them. You buy a lot of machines, you buy a lot of hardware or software. In 2 or 3 years, 4 years, the school district has sunk all that money in something that's obsolete. If you want people able to deal with new things, people who are going to be smart, aside from all the human benefits of art, all the hunger that's probably evolutionarily built into us as a craving that's part of the animal, practically speaking, if we're not going to become a stupid culture, we need arts education, in my opinion. And if you say in response, if you say as a counter-argument, what about the real smart person who knows a lot about math and chemistry and doesn't know much about art? That person's like a projectile, still part of the forward acceleration or thrust of a whole species that evolved for thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of years, in which a basic fundamental thing in the species is art making, is making things. I would think most politicians are very naive about this.
What's the date of the poem, Shirt?
The date when I wrote it?
Yeah.
The book it was originally in was published in, I think, published in one poem. I can look at my own book and find out. The book was published in 90s. I'd say about 88.
Oh, that was a wonderful poem. That was my kind remark. That's a nice shirt you're wearing.
And new too. I'm here to say to you, I like clothes. I'm one of those rare men who like to shop. And people have asked me, did you write that poem by doing a lot of research? No, but to be a poet, to be a writer to me is to be constantly doing research. And words, that this is a placket. Well, this shirt doesn't have a placket. But the placket is that thing that on some shirts sticks up here, and that this is the yoke. It's part of being alive. Like looking at this and knowing that this is a softwood and that somebody didn't bother to put any wood filler in where the finishing nails went in. A term like finishing nail, or that, carpenter would call that a light and not a window, and the vertical parts of it are mullions. That's part of what our job is as writers.
But that wasn't my comment. As poet laureate, do you have to give up your jobs, like, you're the editor of Slate, which is an online, a poetry editor of Slate, which is the online
Yeah.
magazine?
At the moment, I would like to keep all these things going. I'd like to keep teaching. I'd like to keep editing poems for Slate. I'd like to write things. I'm at the age where you start to, some of your friends die, many people's parents die or get sick. I'm at the age when you start to realize how finite life is. So I would like to keep doing all of this stuff if I can. In a way, I do train all your life to articulate the things you believe in. Then you get a little window before you get sick or die. If somebody gives you a job like that, you have a little aperture where you can do some of it. So at the moment, I'm going to try to put it up, but I'm very new to this idea. I'm still figuring it out.
At what age did you start writing, and who were some of your earlier influences?
When I was in high school, I was ambitious to be a musician. So I read science fiction. I read whatever came through the house. Dickens was in the house, so I read Dickens. I loved the Alice books. But I mostly thought I was going to be a musician. I wasn't good enough. So the first things I wrote were songs. Then in high school, I read Allen Ginsberg, Yeats, Eliot, Frost, Ezra Pound, William Carlos Williams. Those were my first heroes. An important breakthrough for me was then in my early 20s. I read Fulk Greville, Ben Jonson, George Gascoigne, John Donne, Thomas Nash, Thomas Campion, English 16th and 17th century. I think that's when I took off. I found something other than the same things all my friends were reading, but I loved the music of that. It was a big moment for me.
What was your very first favorite reading as a child? That you read?
I loved anything, I think retellings of the Mallory tales. I liked everything to do with knights. And I was an American male. These people were riding horses and hitting one another with axes. That's nice. Big lances. So I can remember adoring Ivanhoe and the Waverley novels. So I wasn't in a literary household. I liked that. But the Alice books, read them over and over and over again. Through the Looking Glass and Alice's Adventures. I read them over and over and over for some mystery. I used to love things I couldn't understand. I think that's one of the signs of a child who may be a writer, is adoring things you don't understand. It's like sex. It's like some secret the grown-ups know and you're sort of half in your mind. And just the opacity, reading a book and saying he was wearing a dressing gown and holding a shaving bowl. What's a dressing gown? What's a shaving bowl? I'm thinking of the first page of Ulysses, which I read when I was about 18 years old. I didn't know what those things were, and that's part of why I loved it. I love that feeling, a shaving bowl. I'll read Dying and Ode to Television. Dying. Dying. Am I still audible in the back, by the way? Nothing to be said about it, and everything. The change of changes, closer or farther away. The golden retriever next door, Gussie, is dead. Like Sandy, the cocker spaniel from 3 doors down who died when I was small. And every day, things that were in my memory fade and die. Phrases die out. First, everyone forgets what doornails are. Then, after certain decades as a dead metaphor, dead as a doornail flickers and fades away. But someone I know is dying. And though one might say glibly, everyone is, the different pace makes the difference absolute. The tiny, invisible spores in the air we breathe that settle harmlessly on our drinking water and on our skin happen to come together with certain conditions on the forest floor or even a shady corner of the lawn. And overnight, the fleshy, pale stalks gather, the colorless growth without leaf or flower. And around the stalks, the summer grass keeps growing with steady pressure, like the insistent whiskers that grow between shaves on a face, the nails growing and dying from the toes and fingers at their own humble pace, oblivious as the nerveless moths that live their night or two. Though like a moth, a bright soul keeps on beating, bored and impatient in the monster's mouth. To Television is a recent poem. It'll be in the New Yorker magazine sometime. To television. Not a window on the world, but as we call you, a box, a tube. Terrarium of dreams and wonders. Coffer of light. Ordained cotillion of phosphorus or liquid crystal. Homey miracle. Soiled brilliance. Tub of acquiescence. Vein of defiance. Your patron in the pantheon would be Hermes. Raster dance. Quick one. Little thief. Escort of the dying and comfort of the sick. In a blue glow, my father and little sister sat snuggled in one chair, watching you. Their wife and mother was sick in the head. I scorned you and them as I scorned so much. Now I like you best in a hotel room. Maybe minutes before I have to face an audience. Behind the doors of the armoire. Box within a box. Tom and Jerry. Or also brilliant and also reassuring, Oprah Winfrey. Thank you, for I watched since Caesar speaking French and Japanese, not through knowledge, but imagination, his quickness. And thank you, I watched live Jackie Robinson stealing home. Take the second page. I think I can do it from memory. That image, like these words we remember in, they too are winged at the helmet and ankles. I was starting to read, I was starting to natter about the saxophone. The saxophone for me is an important symbol of culture. The saxophone was invented by a man named Adolphe Sax, a Belgian in the 1840s in Paris. Therefore, it is a European instrument, right? No. It is an American, indeed an African American, a black instrument. Why? Because geniuses made it so. Named Lester Young and Johnny Hodges and Coleman Hawkins and Sonny Rollins and Charlie Parker. They made it their instrument. And if I was going to say in one phrase or word what my attitude is toward culture, towards the English language, the shape of the podium, the brand of the microphone, the English language, poetry, what would one's ambition be in relation to all of this? Television. To make it your instrument. Your surname, your given name, the language you speak, the religion your parents practice, to make it your instrument. They made it their instrument. The poem is called Ginza Samba, and there is a jazz tune called Ginza Samba, played among others by the late Stan Getz. And I like the title, obviously. I like cultural mixing very much. I don't like purity so much, as I like impurity. I think of America, especially, our glory is our mixing. Any good thing you name is American, it's a mixture. Jazz, to which I'm alluding, what is it? It's these European harmonic structures, instruments from all over the world, African rhythms, Northern European, mostly British Isle folk melodies, some French folk melodies, some highbrow music, and improvised, swirled together, and it makes this great thing. This thing that, if 2,000 years from now there's anybody around to say, who were the Americans? One of the things that they would say was, one of the first things they would say was, well, jazz, they invented jazz. I believe they'll also say modern poetry, the poetry of people like Whitman and Eliot, all over the world, people in Asia and South America and Eastern Europe were affected by that poetry. Ginza Samba. A monosyllabic European called Sax invents a horn, la-la whirl-a-dee-wah, a kind of twisted, brazen clarinet, but with its column of vibrating air shaped not in a cylinder, but in a cone, widening ever outward, and bawa spouting infinitely upward through an upturned, swollen, golden bell rimmed like a gloxinia, flowering in Sax's Belgian imagination, and in the unfathomable matrix of mothers and fathers, as a genius graven humming into the cells of the body, or cupped in the resonating braille of memory, changed and exchanged as in the trading of brasses, pearls and ivory, calicos and slaves, slave laborers and slave girls, two cousins in a royal family of Niger known as the birds or hawks. In Christendom, one cousin's child becomes a, quote, favorite Negro, end quote, ennobled by decree of the Tsar, and founds a great family, a line of generals, dandies, and courtiers, including the poet Pushkin, killed in a duel concerning his wife's honor, while the other cousin sails in the belly of a slave ship to the port of Baltimore, where she is raped and dies in childbirth. But the infant will marry a Seminole, and in the next chorus of time, their child fathers a great hawk or bird, with many followers, among them this great-grandchild of the Jewish manager of a Pushkin estate, blowing his American breath out into the wiggly tune, uncurling its triplets and sixteenths, the Ginza Samba of breath and brass, the reed vibrating as a valve, the ether, the unimaginable wires and circuits in an ingenious box here in my room, in this house, built 100 years ago while I was elsewhere. It is like falling in love, the atavistic imperative of some one voice or face, the skill, the copper filament, the golden bellful of notes twirling through their invisible element from Rio to Tokyo and back again, gathering speed in the variations as they tunnel the twin haunted labyrinths of stirrup and anvil, echoing here in the hearkening instrument of my skull.
Did you first come across the word atavistic in Conrad's Heart of Darkness? I know that's where I did, that's only.
I can't remember. I know it was a word that I read for years, meaning to look up. When I was a kid, it was one of those words, like I said, loving things you didn't understand. I know atavistic was one of those sounds that I liked before I knew it, but I don't remember if I read it first in Conrad or not. Avatar is another word. Atavistic, avatar. The way it switches, constant switches, confusing, they're related.
What's Avatar mean?
Avatar has to do with the relationship to a predecessor that you're a throwback to. And atavistic is going back in your ancestry. when I say George Herbert, your descendant is a black woman, a lady in South Carolina, I'm thinking that that woman, if she existed, he would be an avatar of her body, but he's my avatar in my mind because I love his poems.
When you write something, are you more prone to work on something that that you find more friendly, or something that you find more disturbing? What do you prefer to basically attack? Which
I feel as though we all carry around deep emotional attractions and revulsions. And even when one feels there's nothing to write about, or I feel hollow, there's that attraction and revulsion, often towards the same object. If you think about a person or a landscape or a town. And the important moment, thank you, in writing is the moment when you get a little tune in your head, a little sound. So, and then it's possible to write. So the answer really is, whatever it's possible. It's so hard to make a good poem, or a poem, that whatever you can, and often it's the same thing. I mean, think about it. Christianity. You know, I never was a Christian. Your holidays, your Christmas in particular, your music, your architecture, your literature, when the knights are hitting one another and all that, they might suddenly stop and go to a chapel and pray to Jesus. Or worse yet, a Jew comes by, cowardly, vicious, or helpless anyway. This is not a tragedy for the child reading it, but it's annoying. And so is that love or revulsion towards either Judaism or Christianity? I don't know. But, or your hometown. I have a very strong hometown. It's a very historic town in New Jersey. It was a summer White House. My grandfather had a very famous bar in the town. My mother and father went to the same high school as me. My dad had the same homeroom teachers. All my brother and sister and all my cousins and many of my aunts and uncles went to the same school. Do I hate it or love it? You know, it's like your other connections in life. It's hard to distinguish between those two. The moment of writing is the moment of saying, needle, treadle, bobbin. You know, it's like going, you know, it's a physical process. It's a bodily process. I'll read the poems I was going through my mind. From the childhood of Jesus. Unlike the other things I've read, I think unlike everything else I've read you, this is in rhymed couplets. From the childhood of Jesus. One Saturday morning, he went to the river to play. He modeled 12 sparrows out of the river clay and scooped a clear pond with a dam of twigs and mud. Around the pond he set the birds he had made, evenly as the hours. Jesus was 5. He smiled as a child would who had made a little world of clear, still water and clay beside a river. But a certain Jew came by, a friend of his father, and he scolded the child and ran at once to Joseph, saying, "Come see how your child has profaned the Sabbath, making images at the river on the day of rest." So Joseph came to the place and took his wrist and told him, "Child, you have offended the word." Then Jesus freed the hand that Joseph held and clapped his hands and shouted to the birds to go away. They raised their beaks at his words and breathed and stirred their feathers and flew away. The people were frightened. Meanwhile, another boy, the son of Anas the scribe, had idly taken a branch of driftwood and leaning against it had broken the dam and muddied the little pond and scattered the twigs and stones. Then Jesus was angry and shouted, unrighteous, impious, ignorant. What did the water do to harm you? Now you are going to wither the way a tree does. You shall bear no fruit and no leaves. You shall wither down to the root. At once the boy was all withered. His parents moaned. The Jews gasped. Jesus began to leave, then turned and prophesied, his child's face wet with tears. 12 times 12 times 12 thousands of years before these heavens and this earth were made, the Creator set a jewel in the throne of God, with hell on the left and heaven to the right, the sanctuary in front, and behind an endless night, endlessly fleeing a Torah written in flame. And on that jewel in the throne, God wrote my name. Then Jesus left and went into Joseph's house. The family of the withered one also left the place, carrying him home. The Sabbath was nearly over. By dusk, the Jews were all gone from the river. Small creatures came from the undergrowth to drink and foraged in the shadows along the bank. Alone in his cot in Joseph's house, the Son of Man was crying himself to sleep. The moon rose higher. The Jews put out their lights and slept. And all was calm and as it had been, except in the agitated household of the scribe Annas, and high in the dark, where unknown even to Jesus, the 12 new sparrows flew aimlessly through the night, not blinking or resting, as if never to alight. I had a wonderful experience with that poem recently. I gave a reading in Columbia, Missouri, and I was introduced to I think he was a 14-year-old boy, very tall as well as very smart. So he was 6'1", very bright, early adolescent. And he had memorized the poem for his high school recitation class, which was pleasing to me. I was thinking, how did it go over? In Missouri. And the striking part to me was they said his teacher had given them an abstract word, and then they was to find something and get it by heart and then recite it. And the abstract word that he was given was compassion. And I thought, my poem? Compassion? And he said the most wonderful, this is an example of somebody seeing something in something you wrote that is right and good, but you didn't know it was there. He said, well, it's a poem about the compassion and the negative. It shows that compassion has to be learned. That even God, even Jesus Christ, when he's a child, doesn't have compassion. It has to be learned. It's not natural. He acts like any other 5-year-old. He's angry and he strikes out. And it's only through having given injury in a way, at some point in life, that later in life you might think because of the shame or regret you feel about the injury you gave, you might learn compassion. I thought, thank you. I'll read the other poem that was in my mind when I was talking about towns and places. There's one section in the new poems part of my book that is called City Elegies. And it's really just an attempt to portray the place where my dream life happens. We may all have a characteristic terrain where your dreams tend to go. It might, for one person, it might be the woods or a mountain or a certain building, a house. And for me, I think it's a city. Kind of middle-sized, definitely East Coast or European city. Definitely has a river, has water, has railroad tracks. And I know it's partly Long Branch, New Jersey, where I grew up. And maybe Paris is in there, and New Brunswick, New Jersey, where I went to college. And it's probably the city of the movies, too. Anyway, I'll read 2 or 3 of these. City Elegies. 1. The Daydreamers. All day, all over the city, every person wanders a different city. sealed intact and haunted as the abandoned subway stations under the city. Where is my alley doorway? Stone gable, brick escarpment, cliffs of crystal. Where is my terraced street above the harbor, cafe and hidden workshop, house of love, webbed vault, tiled blackness? Where is my park, the path through conifers, my iron bench, a shiver of ivy and margin birch above the traffic? A voice. There is a mountain and a wood between us. One wrote, lovesick, where the late hunter and the bird have seen us. Aimless at dusk, heart muttering like any derelict, or working all morning, violent with will. Where is my garland of lights, my silver rail? This one, the third one, is called House Hour. And it's really kind of my love poem to the certain kind of East Coast neighborhood after coming back to Massachusetts from about 10 years in beautiful Berkeley, California, where I taught for years. I realized I look at a certain kind of lower middle class neighborhood, multiple family dwellings, artificial brick, maybe a candy store, lots of sort of aluminum awnings over the... I look at a neighborhood like that, especially at this time of year, maybe like a couple of weeks ago, it's the end of the day, something in me just goes, ah. It's like Wordsworth looking at a lake. And in response to your question, I don't know if that's pain or pleasure. It's feeling. It's feeling. House Hour. Now the pale honey of a kitchen light burns at an upstairs window, the sash across. Milky daylight moon, sky scored by phone lines. Houses in rows, patient as cows. Dormers and gables of an immigrant street in a small city, the wind-worn afternoon shading into night. Hundreds of times before, I have felt it in some district of shingle and downspout at just this hour. The renter walking home from the bus, carrying a crisp bag. Maybe a store visible at the corner, neon at dusk. Macaroni mist fogging the glass. Unwilled, seductive as music, brief as dusk itself. The forgotten mirror brushed for dozens of years by the same gray light, the same shadows of soffit and beam-in, a reef of old snow glowing along the walk. If I am hollow, or if I am heavy with longing, the same ponderous houses of siding, fur framing, horsehair plaster, fired bricks in a certain light, changing nothing, but touching those separate hours of the past, and now at this one time of day, touching this one. Last spokes of light silvering the attic dust. I'll read one more of these. You know that line, macaroni mist fogging the glass. I've actually had people say to me, what is that? I don't understand. Cook macaroni in the wintertime, windows. This one is called Soot. I guess the proposition in the poem is that to live in a certain kind of neighborhood and near the railroad is better than to live in the same kind of neighborhood with no railroad. That it's something large and impressive like an ocean. I was a kid, I lived near both, lived near the ocean and near railroad tracks. And it's like living near a mountain or the ocean, something you can have thought as a god. And it mates with our young women, and we're descended from it. It's powerful and impressive, as though for people who live near the railroad tracks, their sex life is just slightly better. Soot. Soot. Archaic, the trains mated with our human blood. Stone trestle, abutment wall. Above the tracks, a rakish exile Santa lashed to a pole. Black cinders, burdock, sumac, Pepsi, cellophane. Each syllable a filament in the cord of a word net, knotted in the passionate shadows of skeletal vine and beanpole in one backyard along the embankment. Here, with dirty thunder, deliberate heavy creatures before the light of morning made the bedroom windows tremble with lordly music, and their exhalations tingled our nostrils. Rail-bed tavern and church of former slaves, synagogue of the low, Sicilian grocery, Polish creche, a seed of particles that Zeus-like penetrated the bread and carboned the garden tomatoes. Even our sheets that bucked and capered in the wind flashed whiter than others, tempered by iron black bleaching to armor in silver winter sun.
Why Dante?
I don't know, the question was why Dante? It was something I could do. Human beings tend to do things they can do. I stumbled on it and found I could do it. I could make it sound like a poem in English. And you could say why I practice no religion at all. My children were brought up with no religious education at all, partly in reaction to my own unpleasant experience of religious, nominally Orthodox Jewish household. You could say it's part of the whole story of my life, is to perform this act of either subjugation or arrogation, either humbling myself to the majority culture or taking over the majority culture. My grandfather, the gangster, prize fighter who had the bar, he had the biggest Christmas tree you ever saw. I'm not exaggerating, it was 100, 150 feet tall. And when I was a kid. And maybe this is related to that. But consciously, it was just a matter of technique. I found I could do it. I'll read, I have about 25 after, so I'll read some of the Inferno to you, and then I'll read one more poem by myself, and we'll call it a night. Yes?
When you reinterpreted Dante's Inferno, did you use like the original text, or?
My Italian would have been good enough to work only from the Italian.
Uh-huh.
I had a committee of previous translators.
I see. So you went from English, basically?
No, I had, my main tool was the Bollingen Dante with the en face, the Italian on the left, and the Charles Singleton prose translation on the right. I consulted Longfellow's great, beautiful translation quite a lot. I consulted Mandelbaum and Newsom, which are both not bad translations.
This place where you come from in New Jersey?
Yes.
To you, is this a microcosm of all places?
Of course it is for me, because I was so deeply of it. I had so much pain and pleasure there. It's an important place. You could say it's where the American idea of celebrity that now dominates social life was invented. Because in the 19th century, Newport, Rhode Island, and Saratoga Springs were the resorts where a thing now dead, which was called society, high society, went. And it was people who were superior to actors and patent medicine millionaires and entrepreneurs. They were superior. It's a concept that young people almost couldn't understand. At one time, there were people who were socially prominent, and that was better than to be famous. I think that's about gone. Long Branch is where show business people, Diamond Jim Brady and Lillian Russell went to Long Branch. He had a fleet of electric cars in case one broke down. And they had it illuminated on the inside. They'd ride along the promenade at night. These two big fat people covered with gems and drift, and people could see them with their string of cars gliding on. Grant loved Long Branch. Garfield died in Long Branch, is where he went after he was shot. Grant loved it because it was raffish. You know, it's a racetrack. It was not high society and stiff. It was another kind of showing off. And there's a beautiful Winslow Homer in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston called Long Branch, New Jersey. Homer covered Long Branch like a journalist. He did engraving drawings that were printed in Harper's because it was an interesting place nationally. Really old people in the audience will remember a TV show called Gunsmoke. And the bar was called the Long Branch. So it was named after my town, because in the 19th century it was a combination of, you know, Miami Beach and it was the resort. I'll read part of the Inferno. It's Dante himself as a character, and his guide is the Roman poet Virgil, and they're very near the bottom of hell now. The traders are frozen in ice. And at the end of Canto 32, they live one of these traders, and their heads are down at their feet because they're frozen in this icy lake, and they talk down to them. Betrayal is to freeze yourself, right? You know what your obligation is to your friend or your spouse or your family, your country, if you make yourself cold to it. They leave one. We left him moving on when I saw two shades frozen in a single hole, packed so close, one head hooded the other one. The way the starving devour their bread, the soul above had clenched the other with his teeth where the brain meets the nape. And at the skull and other parts, as Tydeus, berserk with wrath, gnawed at the head of Menelaus, he chewed. You, showing such bestial hatred for him beneath, whom you devour, tell me your reason, I cried, and on condition that your grievance is right, knowing both who you are and what wrong deed this one committed against you, I may yet repay you for whatever you may say up in the world above, by telling it, if that with which I speak does not go dry. Then Canto 33 begins. Pausing in his savage meal, the sinner raised his mouth and wiped it clean along the hair left on the head whose back he had laid waste. Then he began. You asked me to endure, reliving a grief so desperate, the thought torments my heart, even as I prepare to tell it. But if my words are seeds, with fruit of infamy for this traitor that I gnaw, I will both speak and weep within your sight. I don't know who you are that come here, or how, but you are surely Florentine to my ear. I was Count Ugolino, you must know. This is Archbishop Ruggieri. You will hear why I am such a neighbor to him as this. How, through my trust and his devices, I bore, first being taken, then killed, no need to trace. But things which you cannot have heard about, the manner of my death, how cruel it was, I shall describe. And you can tell from that if he has wronged me. A slit in the Tower Mew, called Hunger's Tower, after me, where yet others will be closed up, had let me view several wounds already, when my bad dream came to me, piercing the future's veil right through. This man appeared as Lord of the Hunt. He came chasing a wolf and whelps on that high slope that blocks the Pison's view of Lucca. With him his lean hounds ran, well-trained and eager, his troop, Gualandi, Sismondi, Lanfranchi, had been sent to ride in front of him. With no escape, after a short run, father and sons seemed spent. I saw their flanks, that sharp fangs seemed to tear. I woke before dawn, hearing the complaint of my own children, who were with me there, whimpering in their sleep and asking for bread. You grieve already, or truly cruel you are, as you think of what my heart began to dread. And if not now, then when do you shed a tear? They were awake now, with the hour when food was usually brought us drawing near, and each one apprehensive from his dream. And then I heard them nailing shut the door into that fearful tower, a pounding that came from far below. Hearing that noise, I stared into my children's faces, not speaking to them. Inside me, I was turned to stone, so hard I could not weep. The children wept. And my little Anselmo, peering at me, inquired, "Father, what ails you?" And still I did not cry, nor did I answer, all that day and night until the next sun dawned. When one small ray found its way into our prison, and I made out in their 4 faces the image of my own, I bit my hands for grief. When they saw that, they thought I did it for my hunger's pain, and suddenly rose. "Father, our pain," they said, "will lessen if you eat us. You are the one who clothed us in this wretched flesh. We plead for you to be the one who strips it away." I calmed myself to grieve them less. We stayed silent through that and then the following day. Oh, you hard earth, why didn't you open then? When we had reached the 4th day, Gondo lay stretched at my feet where he had fallen down. "Father, why don't you help me?" he said, and died. And surely as you see me, so one by one I watched the others fall, till all were dead, between the 5th day and the 6th. And I, already going blind, groped over my brood, calling to them, though I had watched them die for 2 long days. And then the hunger had more power than even sorrow had over me. When he had finished, with a sideways stare, he gripped the skull again in his teeth, which ground, strong as a dog's, against the bone he tore.
Do you plan to continue the translation of this poem?
I don't feel like it right now. I did very badly in high school. I got all C's and B's. I was kicked out of school for a while. In the 8th grade, I was in the dumb class. And I just couldn't do things I was supposed to do.
What were you doing instead?
I wasn't supposed to do this. So I
So you
do it.
could.
Doing the other 2 would feel too much like getting A. So right now, maybe someday if nobody expects me to, maybe I'll do it. Also, you know, I didn't get any fellowship or anything. And I'm only going to live a certain number of years. I need time to write my own poems. So if you give me $1 million, I'll do the other 2. Maybe I'll read another new one, another ode. I've gotten interested in the idea of odes. When I was a kid, in that period when I was so unhappy and not doing, the only thing I did right was music. My graduating class, I was most musical boy. Definitely not most poetic or intelligent or anything. I had mental illness in my family. My mother was a disturbed person who then had a head injury, so there were years when it was worse. And I think it made me, the poem is called Ode to Meaning, and I allude to that in the poem. I think I alluded to it in the television poem too. I've never written about my own life as much as a lot of the writers I admire in my own generation. It's just starting to come out a bit. I think it goes right back to that sort of lower class inhibition into, is anything wrong at home? No. No. I'm going to tell you. Anyway, I think that the idea of meaning and orderliness was exotic, incredibly attractive to me, and it's still, it's why I'm a square today. You know, I hear somebody say, you know, it's one of those families where they eat dinner every day at the stroke of 6. Everybody sits in the same place, the same dish, and the same day of the week. You know, I think that's so beautiful. This will be the last poem. It's called Ode to Meaning. Ode to Meaning. Dire one and desired one, Savior, I'll start again. It might help you. I mean, the poem, the opposite of meaning sometimes is not just meaninglessness, it's the arbitrary. And one of the early stanzas in the poem, the words of the poem are in alphabetical order. Ode to meaning, dire one and desired one, savior, sentencer. In an old allegory, you would carry a chained alphabet of tokens. Ankh, badge, cross, dragon, engraved figure guarding a hallowed intaglio, jasper kinema of legendary mind, naked omphalos pierced by quills of rhyme or sense, Torah-like, unborn vein of will, xenophile yearning out of zero. Untrusting, I court you. Wavering, I seek your face. I read that Crusoe's knife reeked of you, that to defile you, the soldier makes the rabbi spit on the Torah. I'll drown my book, says Shakespeare. Drowned walker, revenant. After my mother fell on her head, she became more than ever your sworn enemy. She spoke sometimes like a poet or critic of 40 years later. Or she spoke of the world as Thersites spoke of the heroes. Quote, I think they have swallowed one another. I would laugh at that miracle. End quote. You also in the laughter. Warrior angel. Your helmet, the zodiac, rocket plumed. Your spear, the beggar's finger, pointing to the mouth. Your heel planted on the serpent formulation. Your face of vapor, the wreath of cigarette smoke crowning Bogart as he winces through it. You not in the words, not even between the words, but a torsion, a cleavage, a starting. You stirring even in the Arctic ice, even at the dark ocean floor, even in the cellular flesh of a stone. Gas, gossamer. My poker friends question your presence in a poem by me, passing the magazine one to another, like apes with an oyster. Not the stone and not the words. You like a veil over Arthur's headstone. The passage from Proverbs Arthur chose while he was too ill to teach and still well enough to read. I was beside the master craftsman, delighting him day after day, ever at play in his presence. You, a soothing veil of distraction, playing over dying Arthur, playing in the hospital, thumbing his Bible, fuzzy for medication, ever courting your presence. And you, the prognosis, you in the cough. Gesturer, when is your spur, your cloud? You in the airport rituals of greeting and parting. Indicter, who is your claimant? Bell at the gate, spiderweb, iron bridge, cloak, video, aroma, room. What is your elected silence? Where was your seed? What is imagination but your lost child, born to give birth to you? Dire one, desired one, savior, sentencer. Absence or presence ever at play. Let those scorn you who never starved in your dearth. If I dare to disparage your harp of shadows, I taste wormwood and motor oil. I pour ashes on my head. You are the wound. You be the medicine.